Welcome to episode 12 of Talking Prisoner. Today we have TV royalty with us. This guest was not only a cast member on Prisoner as the prison bookie, but she was also a script writer and script editor. Not only did she appear in Prisoner, but she appeared in 67 episodes of Bellbird as Glenda Chan, played Judy Bryant in Homicide, was also in Matlock Police, Division 4, Spy Force, Contraband, Cop Shop, The Young Doctors, All Saints. She played inmate Faye Quinn. Welcome to Talking Prisoner, annelucas.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Ken.
Hello there.
Lovely
How are
to
you?
see you. Lovely to see you again.
Thank you.
Here we go.
Now, thanks for joining us. It's an absolute honour to have you coming on, and we've got lots of questions for you about Prisoner, of course. But before we do, can we learn a little about your life growing up as a child?
Okay. Well, I was born in Malaysia, a small town called, well, it was a small town then called Batten. It's now a very big town, which is in the state of Johor in Malaysia. I was born in 1946 in July, so just a year, well, less than a year after the World War II finished in the Pacific. And my parents were still hiding in the jungle when my mother conceived me. And I think it was a reason that they finally sort of got out of there and came back into life. They were professional teachers and had been teaching before the war, and they were brought out and repatriated into Batten as teachers because they were rebuilding the country. The country was a mess at that stage. And there I was born. During that time, there was a thing called the emergency. It started when I was about 2 years old, which was actually the sort of leftover guerrilla warfare from the jungle, where they were kind of rebels against the Malaysian government, but against British rule really in Malaysia. And when the Japanese invaded, they fought the Japanese alongside the British. But when the Japanese were conquered and they left, they didn't want to return to British colonial rule. So they then fought the British from the jungles. And so it was a time when there were a lot of troops still in the country because they were now fighting the guerrillas in the jungle. And we called them bandits, but today you'd call them terrorists because they kidnapped and they robbed and they were pretty scary people. And all the British troops, there were troops from Australia, from Fiji, from Britain, and from New Zealand, and they were all around Malaysia fighting these people. So we knew a lot of them because Batten being a fairly small town, there was a sort of, there was a close-knit community of professionals, and they were always putting on concerts and parties and fancy dress balls, and there'd be traveling troops that would come and perform there. And we were involved in all that. And when our family, our community put on things, my father used to do the lighting, and my mother used to sew the costumes, and both of them would be in the things, and I would be in the things too. I played Little Mermaid once, and I played Goldilocks. And this is all before I was 6.
Oh, wow.
So I spent a lot of time, sort of falling asleep in the wings while all the adults got on with their rehearsals and things like that. And I think that might have been part of, how I ended up being an actress. But I also met somebody there that later on had quite a bit of, the meeting had quite a bit of influence later on in my life, which I don't know if you want to hear about it now or later.
Oh, it's up to you.
Hmm?
It's up to you.
You want to hear about
Go ahead.
About it now.
Okay. When I came to Sydney when I was 19, I'd already done a lot of theatre and some television in Perth. I was really lucky to get a very good agent when I first came to Sydney. That was very fortunate. And one of the first things she did, that was Gloria Payton at ICS, International Casting. One of the first things she did was send me to the Crawford Productions auditions that they used to hold. They'd send a couple of people up from Melbourne to hold general auditions to find out, you know, what new talent was around and how they might fit in with their shows and things. And Sonia Borg, I don't know if you know Sonia?
Yes.
Sonia Borg was producing for them at the time, and Len Teal, of course, who was star of Homicide, came up. And Len used to have quite a bit to do with production and script writing and everything as well. And the two of them came up to do the auditions, and I went along to it. And they were pretty interested in me because I looked so young. I had a real baby face, and I could play 14-year-olds even though I was 19, which means that you bring a bit of experience and sophistication to tackling the role, but you still look like a kid, you know, and that was very helpful to them. So we had a good chat, and I did a reading for them and everything. And then they did that thing of, you know, when did you first want to become an actress? And I told them this story about how before I was 6, because a lot of things happened when I was 6, so that I know how to sort of, you know, set up what happened to me. So before I was 6, there was a travelling theatrical group called the Shakespearean Players, I think, which was headed up by Geoffrey Kendall, who is Felicity Kendall's father. Do you know Felicity Kendall, the English actress? Rosemary and Thyme, and a million other things that she's done. Yeah. Well, and she would have just been a little girl about my age, I should think then. I don't know if she was in it at all, but I was so entranced by this. They put on Olive Goldsmith's She Stoops to Conquer, which is a period play, and they all had these beautiful costumes, Victorian costumes. And I watched it because I was there with my parents, and I thought this was amazing because they were so funny and they were exotic creatures, you know, as far as I was concerned. And I had decided I was going to get autographs. I was collecting autographs from people. So I thought, oh, these would be good people to get autographs from. And I knew that school was in the school hall, which was very big and a big stage. And I knew that place like the back of my hand because I'd run around there all my life. And I knew that they were in the staff rooms that were near the headmaster's office, that was what they were using as dressing rooms. So I went backstage to find them to get autographs. Couldn't find anybody. They'd all gone, except there was a light under the door of the headmaster's room, office. And so I knocked on the door and I went in, and there was this guy still in full period costume with the frills and the, you know, all the satin and things, sitting under one of those old-fashioned lamps right overhead so that you could barely see his face because he was down, he was lit from above. And he was doing paperwork. And I sort of sat there, stood there and mouth open. And he said, hello, who are you? Come in. And I came in and he told me to sit down, and he asked me who I was and what I'd been doing. And I said, I'd just seen the play and I thought it was amazing and fantastic and all this sort of thing. And he said, do you want to be an actress when you grow up? And I said, and I'd never thought about it before, but I said, oh, yes, I'd love to be an actress when I grow up. And he put out his hand and he said, look at this. And all the lace on his coat, this wonderful lace, was quite frayed and old. And he said, this is what the costume looks like in real life. Take a look at it. It's very frayed and old. It's an old costume. And he said, acting is a bit like that. He said, it looks wonderful on stage and it seems like a very glamorous life, but it's really hard work and it's not so glamorous as you think. And I said, well, I don't care. And he said, well, that's a good attitude to have. If you don't care about that, if you don't care about the glamour, but you just like the work, then that's a very good attitude to have. And so I said, and after that, I forgot about being an actress for a long time. But I told this story to Sonia and Len. And Sonia said, what year was that? And I said, oh, I was 6 years old. So it must have been less than 6 years old. It must have been about 1952, 1951. And she said, you know what? That lady in the yellow dress that you said was so pretty, that was me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Len nearly fell off his chair. He didn't know. And I just gaped at her. And she said, yes, I was part of Jeffrey Kendall's company. And I remember doing the tour of Malaysia. And I remember Batten. And I was the one in the yellow dress.
Wow.
And yeah, and this was what, 13 years later, and I'm sitting there auditioning for her for Crawford's.
That's
I got a lot of work from Crawford's after that.
I met her. I met her when I was working on Consider Your Verdict.
Yeah.
Out at the Tally Theatre, and of course then I met Len Teal once he started working on Homicide, and I'm standing behind him in the canteen waiting to get lunch, and I thought, that's Superman from radio, because I used to listen to those little, and I got talking to him later on, and he said they used to pay us about £5 per episode.
Oh.
But if you did a number of them, and they were only 15 or 20 minutes long, he said you could do 4 or 5 in a day. And I thought, wow, 5 days a week. Did you? Oh, gee, well, that's a lot of money. And he was such a nice guy.
Yes, he was lovely, Len. Yeah.
That advice that he gave you, would that be some advice that you would give to upcoming actors that want to get into TV? Would that be something you would give?
Oh, God. I get asked that a lot, or I did get asked that a lot when I was in the business. It's very difficult. I think that advice of not getting into it for the glamour is really good, because there's a lot of hard work involved. There's a lot of boredom involved, you know. In television, you spend a hell of a lot of time just sitting around waiting for things to happen. In film, it's the same. And in theatre, depending on how big your part is, you're doing that as well at rehearsals. So there's a lot of that. It's hard to get jobs. It's hard to audition. It's hard to keep your spirits up when you're in between jobs. You don't know what your next job's going to be. Pay is much better these days. It was terrible back in those days. But what should I say to someone who wants to be an actor? Learn everything you possibly can. If you can afford it, take lessons. Not actually so much in acting as in maybe if you've got any kind of a voice in singing, learn to dance, maybe get some speech and drama lessons. People who teach speech and drama can teach you technique. The reason I'm a bit hesitant about saying go to, get drama lessons is usually at that level, you won't learn the sort of techniques you're going to need at the sort of level that you're going to get as a starter that you're going to get. Learn about people, read a lot, read everything you can get your hands on, watch everything you can find, just keep learning. And then starting off, find an agent, hopefully it's a good one. If it isn't, if the agent isn't good for you, try another one. But, and take everything, every job. I mean, Len doing voiceovers and things, you know, that take every job you can, because you build up a CV, you meet people, you build up a history of doing things. And someone somewhere along the line will see you and say, there's an interesting person. Oh, I like that performance. Or, you know, he's a really good looking guy and he can say his lines and not bump into the furniture, which is very helpful. So yeah, it's a long haul. It's no overnight. Everybody I've ever known who's had an overnight success has been 10 years at it before it's happened, you know, at least 10 years. So yeah.
Well, what a great
Good luck.
advice. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
Sorry?
What a great piece of advice. Thanks for sharing that.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You're welcome.
Over to Ken.
Well, over to Ken, but I'm going to handball it back to you, Matt, because I think we've covered just about those questions that we wanted to ask. And I think we're down to meeting Ian Bradley.
Yes.
Meeting Ian Bradley, my TV royalty husband.
Well, he is.
That in this family. Right. Yeah, well, that thing that he talks about, I was a member of the Q Theatre. I mean, he's told you the story of the first time he met me. I was a member of the Q Theatre, which was a lunchtime theatre. I don't think they do it anymore, but at that time there was a little theatre at the bottom of the AMP building in Sydney at Circular Quay. And the old AMP building is still there at Circular Quay, but they built this huge skyscraper behind it because there's skyscrapers everywhere. But at the time, that AMP building was the tallest in Circular Quay. And in the basement, they had a theatre which they let the Q Theatre have for a peppercorn rent. And we used to serve sandwiches and coffee at the little sort of kiosk thing there. And people would come in their lunch hour and we'd put on shows that lasted about an hour. And people would have their lunch and watch some theatre. It was a really good idea. But we were pretty poor, you know, so we used to have these fundraisers, which we rented stables in Victoria Street in the Cross before it was all torn down and turned into apartment blocks. There was a little old set of stables there that we had as offices and rehearsal rooms. And we used to put on these parties there. And for my turn, I would cook curries in big pots, and because it was easy, you cook big pot of rice, big pot of curry, lots of different little side dishes. And then we'd get flagon wine from the grocer over the road who used to sell it. I think it was his brother-in-law's vineyard or something that used to provide him with wine, and we'd get flagons of wine from him very cheaply, but it was pretty good stuff. And then we'd charge everybody $10 to come in and have as much curry and as much wine as they wanted. And they were very good fundraisers. And they were held on a Friday night, once a month, I think, something like that. And lots of people used to come because you were supporting the theatre and also you're getting a good feed. So Ian turned up at that one night. And the only reason I really remember it is because he was with Mark McManus, whom I just finished working with on Waiting for Godot. And Mark, I don't know if you recognize the name, but he went on to be famous as Taggart in the UK. You know, the show Taggart? Show? Yeah. And they had a couple of actresses with them too that I was acquainted with. And And it was very nice to see them all, and I welcomed them all in. I didn't realize I'd made such an impression on Ian. Funnily enough, the dress he mentioned that I was wearing was actually a costume from Bellbird. It was a cheongsam that I wore in Bellbird, which was more of a turquoise color really than a green color. But yeah, the wardrobe gave it to me when I left Bellbird. And so I used to wear it at parties and things like that. But after that, of course, I recognized him when we met in the pub. We all used to drink in this pub called the Gladstone. It was in William Street in the Cross, and it was very close to where the ABC headquarters were. And the ABC was very important for things like radio in those days. You know, most of the actors would make their bread and butter out of radio, and anything like television or stage was sort of, you know, on top of that. But so everybody used to go to the Gladstone. And Ian was one of the people who was always going to the Gladstone, and I sort of got to know him there. But we really only got together when Nick Tate had this, who was a mutual friend of ours. He had this crush on an actress in the music hall where Ian was working at the time, and he wanted Ian to introduce him to this actress, and then he said, "You better come along to me, because I don't want to sort of be there like I'm just waiting, you know, to be introduced to her. You come along and be my date for the night, and then if we get along, you can just disappear." I said, "Yeah, that's fine with me." So we went along to the music hall, and afterwards Ian introduced Nick to this actress, and they didn't get along at all. They didn't hit it off at all. So the two boys, Ian was going on to a late night poker game, and Nick always fancied himself as a poker player. So he wanted to go to the poker game as well. And the poker game was at a Channel 7 producer's place. His name was John Walters, and he was a friend of mine as well, and he was Ian's bridge partner. So another common acquaintance. But also my friend Jackie Weaver was living with John at the time. John actually was the father of Dylan, Jackie's son.
Okay.
And I hadn't seen, Jackie was pregnant at the time, and I hadn't seen her for ages. So I came along to the poker game, and I never played poker before. I wasn't about to play poker that night. I didn't, you know, I never played anything more sophisticated than Snap. I didn't know anything about cards or gambling or anything. And I went along, and Jackie and I were sort of sitting, drinking in the corner and chatting away, and the boys were playing poker. And I thought, that's funny, because I was watching Ian play poker, and he seemed to be so careless, so sort of unassuming. He was just playing. A lot of the time he was putting his cards into the middle, you know, folding. And I thought, why doesn't he doesn't seem to play much, but he seems to win a lot, and I don't understand what's going on. And then when he won, he didn't seem to win as much as the others, because the piles of things, that tokens in front of him, were much smaller than the piles in front of other people, but they were a different color. And I said to Jackie, how much are those yellow colored chips worth? And she said, oh, they're $50 ones. And I thought, oh, I see. Well, he's doing pretty well then, because he had a lot more $50 chips than anybody else. So I took more interest in him after that. I thought, this is a very interesting person who manages to play a card game like this so well without looking like he's trying at all. I mean, everybody else was sort of, you know, doing this and playing poker face. And you could read them so well.
Yeah.
But Ian just didn't look like, you know, he looked like he was enjoying himself, and he was having a drink, and He was playing cards and everything's cool. But he was earning a living, really.
Yeah.
That's how he used to earn his living in those days.
Mm. What was the first thing that you and Ian actually worked on together? First production?
Well, the first production was a script that he wrote and produced himself, called Booze and Cheers, which was based on the Gladstone. So it was a pub where actors went to drink, and their antics, you know, their adventures, the adventures of these two actors that were played by Drew Forsyth, who's theatre royalty, and John Hargraves, who was the vet show, Crawford's, what's that vet show called that he did?
Was it Blue?
I mean, apart from heaps of, sorry?
Wasn't Blue?
Country vet.
I know the one.
Sorry?
About.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, apart from a lot of other things, he did a lot of stuff, John. But yeah, they were the two stars. Carol Skinner played Jan the barmaid. And Jan the barmaid was a real person in the Gladstone who was very important to all of us. And Carol was Jan the barmaid. And I was wardrobe. I did the wardrobe and I did props. And Max Varnell, who was a mate who was directing Skippy at the time, he directed it. We did it with a very small grant from the Arts Council or the government or someone. And we used, one of the sets we used was Margaret Fulton's house in Balmain. Yeah. Her husband, Dennis, was a drinking buddy. He used to be in the Gladstone a fair bit because he was an actor too, and he did a lot of radio. And he said, oh, you can shoot the flat scenes, the apartment scenes in my place. So, yeah, so we did. And I don't think Margaret was very impressed at all. She liked the idea of all these actors and crew people coming around and dragging cables and things all over a living room. But yeah, so we did that. And I thought it was a really nice little thing. And we hoped that it was a pilot and it would go on for a series and starring these two actors. So we did it on a shoestring. And I think it was Channel 7 was quite interested in it. But they gave it to some expert or other on these things who said, oh, Australians won't watch things about people in pubs. They won't watch a show about that's based on a pub because it's, you know, it's drinking and all that sort of thing. And it's a bit tacky, so they won't watch it. So we never sold it. And then, of course, Cheers came out. 4 years later. 4 years later, Cheers hit the screens and it's a huge success.
It could have been the Aussie version of Cheers. Wow.
It could have been another, well, we called it Booze and Cheers. We thought, you know, booze, as in BOOS, yeah, and cheers sort of related to the actors and all of that, but also to do with the pub and drinking. But no, we were apparently, Australian audiences apparently wouldn't buy a show about drinking and drinking.
They would have loved it. Back in episode 4 of Talking Prisoner, when Ian was on, he told us a very funny story about the drive across the Nullarbor plain. Do you have a funny story you can share about Ian, or is that off limits?
I don't know. What was the funny story about driving across there? I must have missed that bit.
Oh, the Nullarbor plain. He said there was... you remember back in episode 4, Ken, there was a big drive he did over the Nullarbor plain and car broke down and he left the car there. And
that was when he went or didn't go to work with the oil people. Yeah, right. I don't know about funny story, but I can tell you a story about, did you know he's a very good chess player? Did he mention that? Well, he probably wouldn't mention that he's a very good chess player, but he didn't mention chess at all. He is a very good chess player. He doesn't play a lot. He doesn't like playing games when they're just games, he played cards heaps because he made his living like that. He played chess because he could, but he never really bothered too much about it. But I'd seen him play chess, and I played chess a bit, and I thought he was very good. And we'd been living together for just over a year, probably, when I was cast in The Last of the Red Hot Lovers, which is a play by Neil Simon, and it started in Melbourne. We had Harry H. Corbett, Steptoe's son. Harry Corbett was the star, and 3 of us were in it. 3 women who each had 1 act within. It was 3-act play, so it was sort of like 3 two-handers. And Leela Blake was one of them, whom you would know from Melbourne television and stage. Betty Lucas, who became a really close friend, she played Clara Goddard. Yeah. And in one of the early seasons of Prisoner, and myself. And we were to rehearse in Melbourne. Oh, and it was directed by Al Sandor from The Young Doctors too, whom I didn't know at all at the time. This is way before Young Doctors. And we were to rehearse in Melbourne at the Comedy and play at the Comedy, open at the Comedy. And I wanted Ian to come down and at least visit while I was in Melbourne. But plane tickets were expensive back then. The only reason I flew back and forth between Sydney and Melbourne is because whatever production I was in was paying for it, Yeah. And I knew that Ian probably wouldn't be able to afford it. I certainly couldn't ask him to spend that sort of money to come and see me, but I wanted him to come down. So I was trying to work out a way of saying, because I was on a very good salary with Last of the Red Hot Lovers, and I would be able to afford it, but I was trying to work out a way of saying, come down, I'll pay for your plane ticket, without kind of offending him. And we lived in this block of flats in Double Bay, where it was a bit like number 96 without too much scandal. Everybody knew everybody else, and we all used to have parties together and things. And there was one guy who lived in one of the flats who really fancied himself as a chess player. And he and Ian got talking about chess one night at one of the parties. And I could see Ian just being very quiet about it all. And this guy was going on about moves and, talking chess stuff. And he said to Ian, we should have a game, and Ian saying, oh, no, I don't think so. I'm really not into it that much. And I thought, I know what. It was the biggest gamble of my life, I tell you. I said, I reckon you should have a game. You should have a competition, and I'll put up the prize. It'll be a plane ticket to Melbourne. And he had sort of looked at me, and he obviously thought, oh, well, there's something in it. There's something in it for me. Yeah, I'll take up the challenge. Of course, the other guy was over the moon. He thought this was terrific because he thought he had it in the bag. And I must say that there was a moment there when they started playing that I thought, oh, what have I done? What if he wins? What am I going to do with him if he turns up in Melbourne? Geez. So, but he didn't, of course. He didn't. Ian absolutely demolished him. And I got to give him a plane ticket to come and see me. It was great.
It all worked out.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't suppose you can remember the opening. Was it the Sicilian defence, or was it the Queen's Gambit declined? Or
don't ask me things like that, Ken.
Okay.
No, it wasn't. You didn't demolish him that way. It wasn't one of those,
I'll ask you a different question.
That's why I had that little moment of nerves. I thought, maybe this isn't as easy as I thought. But he used to, when eventually we moved back to Sydney with the show, and we played the Metro Theatre in the Cross with Last of the Red Hot Lovers. And so Ian used to come in towards the end of the evening to meet up with me at the theatre backstage. And then we'd go off and party or something together afterwards. But he got in, because Leela Blake was the first act, I was the second act, and Betty Lucas was the third act. He used to come at around about my act, and he'd be in the dressing room with Leela, who was a mad chess player. So she'd got out the chessboard, and she and Ian used to play. It was fascinating to watch them, because Leela used to study the board, and she probably knew all those gambits, and she'd be really serious. And Ian would be there waiting for her to make a move. And as soon as she made her move, he'd go, and he'd make his. And then she'd be back there again, trying to work out the next move. And I don't think she ever won. She used to get really cross because she liked to win. And she used to get cross with me. She'd say, "Oh, your boyfriend's a bastard." Not very polite, never lets me win.
The shelves in the background are comprised of art and cooking books. Can you tell us something about the favourite things that you like to cook?
Oh, wow. I like to cook almost everything. I love cooking. I love the adventure of cooking. I love food, not just to eat, but I love its history and its traditions. And I love the fact that food gathers people around and connects people. And I love cooking for people because it's so nice to see them enjoy, what I've cooked and really love it. So we used to have very large dinner parties. I've cooked Christmas dinner for 20 plus people in this house. We had to move all the furniture out of the living room and set up trestle tables. There were so many. For parties, I used to cook big lasagnas. I had this huge lasagna dish that was given to us for our wedding, which was a sort of staple for parties. Well, I think I've said somewhere that lasagna is the loaves and fishes of parties, because it just, you can spread it out amongst so many people. I used to cook a lot of Chinese banquets because I went to a lot when I was a little kid. Mum and Dad used to go to Chinese banquets set on the big, 20 plus courses, and all the kids were all around. I've got photographs of me with all these people around, all eating and drinking happily, and this sort of little head that just comes over the table, which is me at the thing. And when it all went on for too long and the kids got tired, we always used to disappear under the table, and we'd all go to sleep under the table. And in fact, our children have done that all their lives as well. They've always been at our parties, and when they're too tired, they just fall asleep, mostly under the table if we're in a restaurant. So yeah, I remembered that. So I used to try and recreate that. But the trouble is, Chinese food is all about preparation. So I do lots of preparation, lots of chopping up and things, and I wrap little bits up in Glad wrap, and put them in the fridge so that when I came to that course, I'd just be able to have it, and I'll put it all together. But by about the 10th course, when you've been eating and drinking, and especially drinking rather too much wine while I'm cooking, I'd forget all the little bits and pieces, and everybody else would be so squiffed that they wouldn't know either. They just, oh, this is great. And Ian would find little things wrapped up in the fridge the next day and tease me about it. But I found his shoes in the fridge one morning. Yeah.
Pardon?
We'd come home from somewhere very late, 3 o'clock in the morning or something, and I just crashed. And he got undressed and very carefully put away his shoes in the fridge. I still don't know why. I don't even remember that he used to put away his shoes in a cupboard. So why he would suddenly decide that they had to go to the fridge, I have no idea. But yeah, so he couldn't tease me too much about things. Rod Hardy was often a guest at our parties and dinner parties. One time we used to live in this little workers' cottage behind Pran Markets when we were doing Prisoner. And I love Pran Markets, such a fabulous markets.
Right.
And I'd found a big paella pan, it was huge. It was really huge pan, and fell in love with it and thought, I've got to buy that, and I've got to make paella. So I bought it and I brought it home. And this workers' cottage had one of those electric stoves with the solid electric plates. Have you ever tried to cook on those things? They're terrible. Anyway, I tried to cook paella on it, and it's such a big pan, and the solid state electric plates only cooked one portion of the pan. So the portion that they cooked was all burnt, and all the rest of it was still raw. The rice was still raw and everything was still raw. But I had decided that we were going to start with oysters and martinis. So we were having oysters and martinis, and more martinis and more martinis while I waited for this wretched paella to cook itself. And finally, when I dished it up, I'm not even sure that it was cooked when I dished it up, but we'd been waiting so long. And I remember Rod Hardy saying, "Oh, Annie, I don't know how you do it, but you're such a fabulous cook. You just make everything taste so nice, even when it's burnt." Yeah, I don't know. He'd had about 3 jugs of martinis by then, so I think it was that was talking. Yeah, we had good parties. They were good fun. I love cooking.
Yeah, I know the fans will be desperate for us to start talking about Prisoner, but before we do, we've had a lot of fans reach out about Bellbird. So if we can just touch on that just for a few minutes. So Bellbird ran from 1967 to 1977 for 1,562 episodes. You played Glenda Chan for 67 episodes. And Bellbird also featured a lot of cast members from Prisoner, such as Maury Fields, Julia Blake, Alan Hopgood, Patsy King, Shelia Florance, Maggie Miller, Gerda Nicholson, George Malaby, Ian Smith, and a lot more. How did you get the part for Bellbird?
Oh, right. Well, back to the Gladstone again.
Okay.
Yeah. I was still 19. I'd just arrived from Sydney, and I'd done a couple of Crawford shows by then, but that was all really. And I was in the pub, and this very nice guy was having a chat. We were at the bar having a chat, and he seemed very interested in my background, and I was telling him about Malaysia and my parents, because I don't think I mentioned, but both my parents were Eurasian. My father was half Burmese and half Irish, and my mother was half Malay and half English. So I was explaining to him this, that I was a mongrel, really. And he seemed very interested and very nice. And then afterwards, somebody said to me, "Oh, you were getting on very well with the new head of drama for the ABC." Oh. And I had no idea. His name was Eric Taylor, and I had absolutely no idea that he was anything really, except a nice bloke in the pub, probably another actor, probably another out-of-work actor. And nothing happened for a little while after that. And then they rang my agent and asked me to do the part in Bellbird, because they were looking for a Chinese girl. And I think, as Ian's mentioned before, it was very difficult to cast Asian parts in those days. The actors just weren't around. And I guess, me being Eurasian, and I can look very Oriental and get away with it. So they cast me as Glenda, and I went down to Melbourne to do it. Eric, was responsible for quite a lot of really good shows from the ABC, things like Contrabandits, for example, which was a lovely show. But he was also the wife of, she played Helen Gordon in The Young Doctors, or any fan of The Young Doctors would know her immediately. And I don't know why her name has just completely gone out of my head for a minute. They were both at our wedding, in fact. But yeah, she was Helen Gordon's husband.
Okay.
Yeah, so what am I saying? Oh, that's right, and Bellbird, yeah. I remember going down to Bellbird. It was quite strange because it was the first time I'd ever had such a long period of television, a role that lasted that long, because I was in it for 3 months. You have to understand, when it says 1,000 episodes or whatever, they were only quarter-hour episodes, which actually isn't much less than half-hour shows are today. When you consider ads and things like that, I think they run about 22 minutes of script. Ours was 15 minutes without ads. And we had the luxury, we did 4 eps a week, so an hour a week. We had the luxury of having rehearsals, which was across the way from the Elstonwick studios in the church hall across the way, which was all marked out. And we'd have rehearsals for 2 days, and the third day the camera crew would come in and do the camera plot, and then the 4th and the 5th days we would shoot. But because we're talking the 60s now, and technology was not far advanced here, the cameras were huge things on gas pedestals. You probably remember them, Ken.
I worked them.
Oh, are you even too young to remember that?
No, I'm not. I worked on those cameras at Channel 7 in the 1960s.
Yeah. Well, they yeah. So, but there was also some sort of problem with recording, that stopping tape was a no-no, absolute no-no. We used to record the show from scene 1 to scene whatever it was, 10 or 12, as though it was a theatre show.
As live.
Yeah, sort of. It wasn't actually live. It wasn't going live to air, but we would record it as live, as a live performance, which of course meant that if you had to change sets, you had to sometimes run across the studio, because the set that you were supposed to walk casually into in the next scene was right the other end of the studio. So you'd sort of stroll out of one scene and run like a bat out of hell and stroll into the next scene. And because it was shot like that, you just, if something happened, if something happened to the cameras, they would stop tape and we'd all sit around. But if something happened to the actors, they wouldn't, and if you were an actor and you stopped tape because you forgot your lines or you fumbled something, there'd be the voice of God would come down, from above and be very displeased. So we used to shoot right through it. And I remember Sheila in particularly, because we shot the pilot and then I was in it for the first 3 months. So a lot of the people you mentioned, I didn't actually work with in Bellbird, but I did work with Ellie Valentine and Shelia Florance and Gerda Nicholson too. And Sheila, I played a girl that Ellie sort of adopted. Ellie's character adopted and brought into her house because she was an orphan, and she was going to commit suicide. She was so lost and alone. And Ellie brings her in. And Shelia played Ellie's housekeeper. She was wonderful. And one of her storylines was this character called Bert, who was her son, whom we never saw, but he used to drive the school bus apparently, and she was always complaining about him and talking about him. And then one day the storyliners decided they'd bring Bert in, and Bert would be very drunk because he was often drunk, and he would come and try to kill Shelia, try to strangle her. Well, because Bert was only a walk-on, really, an extra with a couple of lines, you know, all he had to do was walk on and try to strangle Shelia and say a couple of threatening things while he was doing it.
Just excuse me, I'll go and turn off the dog.
Turn off the dog, okay. Yeah, so because of that, they really didn't cast a proper actor. They cast some guy who was a wrestler. Had done some ads or something, and so had an agent, and so they cast this guy as Bert, and the man went berserk in rehearsals. He was fine. As soon as the cameras rolled and we came to that scene, he came lumbering into and I was the only other person in the scene apart from Shelia. Shelia and myself were supposed to be in the homestead kitchen, when this guy comes lumbering in looking for his mother, intent on murder. And he grabbed hold of Shelia and he was strangling her. And I thought, shit, he's really hurting her. And I'm trying frantically to tell the floor manager what was happening. And they were just letting it happen. And Shelia going blue in the face. And I suppose everybody thought, oh, gee, what good acting or something. The set moved that he was so brutal. He moved at one of the flats of the kitchen, and it was never right after that. It always used to fall apart every now and again. Eventually, Julian Pringle, who was the floor manager all the way through my time in Bellbird, yelled, cut, stop tape. And we sort of extricated Shelia and sat her down and revived her. But it was absolutely terrifying. I'll never forget that. And then, yeah.
That's just what a story. I mean, that's.
Well, yeah. I think one of the funny ones, one of the scenes I'd like to see again was a scene that I shot with Elspeth when we were in a car. And it was my final scene in Bellbird. And Glenda has this long speech about thanking Ellie thanking Laurie Chandler, which was the character's name, for helping her and all this sort of thing. And also saying, you know, I don't think there's anything for me here in Bellbird, but I'd like to become a nurse. I want to make a career for myself. So I'm going to the city to become a nurse. And it was much, much longer speech, and it was all sort of very emotional and stuff. Well, it was supposed to be raining, and it wasn't raining. So they had a hose, which was kind of strapped up and was supposed to splash onto the windscreen at a certain time. And Laurie was supposed to Ellie was supposed to turn on the windscreen wipers, and it was all very artistic, except the bloody thing wouldn't work, of course. The rain overshot the car at one stage. Another time it got into the side window and drenched Ellie. Another time, you know, it hit one side of the windscreen and not the other. And we were ages doing that. And by the time we ended it, Ellie and I were just hysterical. We could hardly get a word out because we were waiting for this rain to happen, which was being very stubborn and refused to rain. So I remember that well. I'd love to see it again, just to see how we managed to deliver that scene, because it was a very serious, moving, poignant scene. And I don't know that it ever came over as that, because we were just trying not to laugh most of the time. We looked at, one thing I remember was both of us were convinced that when the rain finally worked, we looked so relieved. Must have been a bit odd.
Why didn't they shoot it? I mean, it rains every day in Melbourne. Why didn't they just wait for it?
I know. And this was a night shoot as well.
Wow.
And I remember it was quite cold. Yeah. And the poor old crew are outside freezing to death and trying to make this hose work. So that was fun.
Your final
Crazy.
scene on Bellbird brings us to Ken's question.
Well, yeah. How did it come about that you left Bellbird?
Well, the reason that they had me go to the city to become a nurse was really because they couldn't think up any Chinese stories. And I think that's a problem that remains for us, you know. Only really recently have we come to see non-Anglo-Saxon people in our shows who are just people, just characters in the show. You don't have to write special ethnic stories for them. And certainly back then, it was a great difficulty somehow for the storyliners and the writers. It was fine when I was part of somebody else's story, but as soon as they sort of find a Glenda storyline, they couldn't think of it as she's a young girl growing up. She hasn't got a family. You know, she must fall in love. She must act like things happen to her, like any normal person. But it wasn't like that. It had to be sort of somehow rooted in the whole Chinese thing. And they just couldn't think up any more stories, I think, that involved that. One of the things we watched the Newsreader, which is on ABC at the moment. And one of the things I like very much about that show is the fact that their head of the news department is clearly ethnically Indian. And one of the aspiring journalists who would like to be a producer is ethnically Japanese. They're both Australians, but you can tell from their looks, their ethnicity. But nobody's bothered about that. They're the characters they are in the show. It has nothing to do with their ethnicity. And the more we can have that happen, I think, the better. I mean, unless you're dealing with issues of racism or something like that, if that's the point of the show, then fine. But otherwise, we should have all these faces in our shows because we have them in our society.
Definitely. In 2004, it was reported that ABC recorded over all the master tapes of Bellbird. And
I know.
you did. So how did all that happen? Because you can't find Bellbird anywhere online, which is a real shame.
Real shame. Yeah, real shame. I worked for a while in the noughties as a curator for the film and television
Archives.
Archives, when they set up a website. And I did some curating for them. And one of my jobs that they gave me was Bellbird. And so I thought, oh, great, I can revisit all this old footage. It'll be such fun. And there wasn't any. There was Robin Ramsey, Charlie Cousins stepping off the silo. And there was some weird footage of a whole bunch of people who were swimming in a dam or something and sort of jumping off the side of the dam and swimming around in it. And I recognized Ken Shorter, who was a friend of mine. I recognized him in it, but I didn't recognize anybody else. So I don't really know why they kept that little piece of footage, but that's all I could find. And I mean, that was only, I mean, it wouldn't have been 30 seconds, I don't think, that little piece. And of course they kept the Robin thing on because they were always playing that. Every time anybody said Bellbird, you'd see Robin stepping off the silo.
Yeah, well, that scene is they said it's one of the most iconic death scenes in Australian TV history, is him stepping off the silo. They said it's up there with Molly dying on a country practice.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing, isn't it? I think it was a big mistake by the ABC because they didn't realise how popular Robin was. They didn't realise how popular Charlie Cousins was, because he was kind of the villain of the show. He was the greedy, grasping real estate person. In fact, he was the reason that in the very first episode I tried to commit suicide, because he was trying to take my grandmother had died, and he was trying to diddle me out of the little piece of property that she'd left me. So, you know, he was that sort of a character. But he also had a thing for Laurie, Elspeth's character. So that softened him because he was in love with her. But otherwise, he was a terribly nasty man.
I actually looked up why he left Bellbird. I actually looked up why he left Bellbird. He was offered a lucrative contract over in Japan at the time. So they let him go. And they had to kill him off quickly. So they thought that would be the death scene. And
well, no, they didn't have to kill him off. They could have sent him on a real estate agent's trip to Sydney or something. They didn't have to kill him off. He'd been asked to play Fagin in Oliver in Japan, which of course, it's a great gig. And he wanted to do it. And so they said, fine, we'll write him out. We'll kill him off. And they did that. And then there was such a furore about it. You know, I don't think the ABC even realised how many people watched Bellbird until that moment, because all of a sudden there were letters and people complaining about it. Yeah. And then they tried to bring Robin back and he wouldn't come back. So I don't know how they were going to resurrect Charlie after pushing him off the silo, but yeah, they wanted him to come back as his twin brother or something.
Yes, twin brother.
He didn't want to come back, so he didn't.
His granddad is actually the founder of the Kiwi shoe polish company.
Kiwi boot polish, yeah.
Yeah.
And he used to, this is why I'd love to see the footage again, because Robin had this thing about, he worried about learning his lines. He could learn lines for theatre. I mean, he played Agin, for goodness sake. You know, no problem with that. For some reason, he had difficulty with it on television. And I think it was just the sort of broken up nature of telly, you know. So he used to have this, you know, the story about Spencer Tracy used to have his lines pasted up on the things, and all that moody stuff that Spencer Tracy does in the film. Everybody thinks is wonderful is him reading his lines off whatever it is that he's basing it on. And so Robin thought this was a really good idea. So he used to have bits of his script pasted on things everywhere. And generally, strangely enough, they were on boxes of Kiwi boot polish, which seemed to appear on the ABC in Charlie Cousins' stock and estate agent, stock and station agent office.
What an incredible coincidence.
Yeah. Needs a lot of Kiwi boot polish.
We're now going to get, finally, for all the fans, to one of the greatest Australian TV shows, Prisoner. When Ian first told you about Prisoner, what did you think about the show at the time? What were your thoughts?
I liked the idea. I was a bit wary of it because the only women's prison show I knew up to that stage was Within These Walls, the UK show, which I didn't much like. I found it a bit tedious, really, a bit boring. and unreal somehow. I didn't believe in it. I didn't believe in it, and I was worried that that this might be another one, particularly knowing Reg's work. And Reg is a bit soft. You know, his stuff was a bit soft, a bit kind of, yeah, soft is a good word for it. And I thought, I don't know, but it was certainly a very good opportunity for Ian. He hadn't produced anything up till that moment, except his own sort of small things. And this was a huge opportunity because he was given the responsibility of literally setting it up. I mean, the script and the idea might have been there, but he had to set the whole thing up, cast it, everything. And I knew he could do that. I was quite certain he could. But then he told me about his ideas for it. And the more he talked about it, the more I realized that it could be a very good show. But then I was scared that Australia wasn't ready for it, because even today, there's rarely been a woman's show, a show that has so many women in it for a start, you know, and certainly back then there wasn't. And his idea of the women, I knew, was going to be based on real people and on the people that we knew. And I thought, he is a bit brave. People were watching The Young Doctors and things like that, you know, which is pretty fantasy and romance and stuff. I'm not sure if they're going to be ready for this. But he was right. He was right. And he was right all along. And he always believed in it, even when everybody else doubted, including the cast. There were even people in the cast that were worried that this was all too much and people wouldn't accept it and so on. And he fought for it, and he was right. And, you know, the rest is history. It was an extraordinary time, and it was an extraordinary show. I guess that has to be behind its longevity, really, that it was so new for its time that it kind of still resonates today, you know. His idea that we're all prisoners of our circumstances, and that the attitude that we take to the prison we live in is the important thing. And that's what gives us the freedoms that we have or that we don't have. And I that's quite a profound thought, and it's the basis of Prisoner. Certainly was when we started it. I don't know how it developed, but for the first 3 years, that was the mantra. And I remember him telling us, as writers, don't write them like women, write them like people. Because back then, women characters were either whores or ladies. You know, they were real twin set and pearl type characters, even if they were in prison or had done something wrong. Or there was the idea of a woman with strength and passion. With just, I mean, they were there all around us, but they didn't seem to make it to the screen. Yeah. And women were either busybodies, those sorts of characters. There were no villains. Those sort of characters were either villains because they were busybodies or gossips, yeah, or, you know, just, or mad. But they weren't strong and passionate just because they were people and had things that they needed to be strong and passionate about. And that's what I think Prisoner brought to the screen.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So season 1, episode 56, which was written by yourself and produced by Ian and directed by Marcus Cole. So that was your first episode as a writer. So can you tell the fans how the job come about for being the writer and the process of writing the script?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I was script editor from the beginning of the 2-hour piece. So episodes 1 to 16 had already been written and edited by the script department in tandem with each other, and mainly a lot by Ian. When we went to 2 hours a week, we had to split up all those jobs because it was very tough doing 2 hours a week. Nobody had ever done it before. People rarely do it even today. Yeah. We had no money and no time. And Ian couldn't get, I think he's said this in his interview, he couldn't get a script editor because we were in Crawford country, and Crawford's was very wary that we were going to steal all their people, offer them more money and sort of bring them over to the dark side. But so he simply couldn't find a script editor. The people who worked in the script department who had worked for Crawford's before, like Denise Morgan, had actually left Crawford's on not such good terms earlier on. And so, you know, thank God we had someone like Denise with us in the script department. That was terrific. But anyway, he couldn't find a script editor, and he said to me, "You can be a script editor." And I said, "I don't know what a script editor does. You know, what do you mean I can be a script editor? I'm an actress." And he said, "Well, you've been to uni, you know, you've done literature, you know how to read a script, you're an actress, you know how to analyze a script, you know what characters are about, you can spell." And I said, "Well, what's that sheet that you keep doing, you're filling in with numbers all the time?" And he said, "That's just the running times." And I said, "Well, what's that all about?" And he said, you've got to time the scenes, and then you write down the time. And then at the end of it, you add all of that up and you see whether it fits into the time that you've got to shoot. And if it doesn't, you have to go back and find somewhere where you can cut it out. And if it's overtime, if it's under time, you may have to write a bit more to fill in so that it comes out at the right time. Now, there is a lot more to it than that. But that was the bit that I thought, oh, yeah, well, I can do that. And of course, a lot of it has to do with being able to act and having experience as an actor, because you learn, you understand the dialogue, and you can hear it, you can see how it flows or doesn't flow, as the case may be, and then you've got to work out why, you know, and maybe do some rewrites, or if you've got time, ask the writer to do the rewrites and explain to them why what they've done doesn't work. So it's a much more complicated job than just timing it. But that's what I was. So for almost the whole of the first year, I was the script editor. And all of us in the script department, one time or another, would take an episode, write an episode. Sometimes because there wasn't a writer available, sometimes because an episode had come in that was so badly written, it just completely failed, and somebody had to completely rewrite it, and then they would get the credit for it. I can't remember which one, you know, whether this was one of those or just an episode that came my way to write. But that would be how I got the job as a script writer, yeah. Wow. I trained Ian Smith as a script editor. Yeah, I did. He was an actor. He was working at Knight's Music Hall, or not Music Hall, it was Dirty Dick's, I think it was. Do you remember Dirty Dick's?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And it was kind of theatre restaurant, you know, and he was working with Dave Worthington. There's a complete workaholic. I mean, he was storyliner at Prisoner during the day and used to go off and do Dirty Dick's at night. And Ian was a mate of Dave's. And when I got too pregnant to fit behind a desk, because I was pregnant almost all the way through the script editing days. Excuse me. We were looking around for someone to train as a script editor, and Dave said, well, my mate Ian wants to get into the business, and he's been asking about writing scripts and things like that. He'd be interested in being a script editor. So Ian turns up, and I'm supposed to train him. So I just did what Ian did with me, you know. And again, it wasn't that difficult because he was an actor and he's an intelligent person, and so he got it quite quickly. But the one thing that happened was to do with the timings, because I explained to him what the timings were about and how to do it, and to make sure that when you're doing it, you don't, when in a scene it says he closes the car, he opens the car door, gets out of it and closes it, you don't just do it like that. You don't allow 2 seconds for that, because it takes a lot longer than 2 seconds to go through those motions. So every time you've got an action piece, if you're timing it, you've got to imagine the action and time it accordingly. And I got very good at that. So I was explaining to him about all that. He got that too. And the first script that he edited and timed went across my desk, and I don't think I had too many notes on it. This is a really good job. That's great. Now send it up to Sydney, because in those days, again, no computers or anything, you know, just, I mean, we did a lot of stuff by hand, and cutting and pasting was cutting and pasting. Like you would cut a piece out of the script and paste it onto another bit, or you would write a rewrite and paste it into the script. So once you got a script together, it was full of all of this and little notes in the corner and all this sort of thing. And then, because headquarters for Grundy's was in Sydney, it would be sent up to Sydney, and they had their own printing sort of department, and all the scripts would be printed out there with the timings at the end of each scene, which they'd put in, because you would just send up your list of timings, you know, scene 1, this scene 2, scene 3, and then they would put the timings onto the actual script, and then they would send all the scripts down in a big box, and the scripts would be distributed in Melbourne. And Ian had done a terrific job, and I said, okay, now you can send it up to Sydney. And he sent it up to Sydney, and I got a phone call from them saying, there's no timings. And I said, yes, there is. He did the timings. And said, no, there's no timings at all. So I said to Ian, where are the timings? Why didn't you send the, he said, the timings, I threw them away. What did you throw them away for? He said, well, I've done them. And you said it was okay. So I sent up, and you said I could send up the script. So I sent up the script and I threw away the time. So we had to time it all over again. And I did. It just goes to show, when you teach somebody to do something, the number of things you can miss out on teaching them to do, because you're so familiar with it, you think you don't even think of mentioning it.
Yeah.
Because it seems so obvious, but quite clearly it isn't, you know. And it wasn't his stupidity, it was my fault, because I should have realized that he doesn't understand that part of what happens. So there you are.
Just before I ask you,
he gave me a lovely little book of Shakespearean sonnets to say thank you, and I finally left and went off and had a baby.
just before Ken asks you his question, did you all, like all the writers and storyliners and editor, all work in the one sort of office, one big room together, or
no? No, we had the office that we had in Melbourne, in South Yarra, had a big central area. There were sort of offices all off onto the side, and then there was this big area which had a big table in it that we had meetings around, whether they was forward planning meetings or the storyliners used it all the time to do their story meetings. But it also doubled as a party table, particularly on Friday nights. And every Friday evening, we would have TGIF drinks, which is Thank God It's Friday drinks. And it was open to everybody. I mean, cast and crew and various people used to come in, and then visitors, and, you know, anybody was allowed. And then we used to use the table for party drinks. And they were very important, those Friday nights, because it's where lots of communication happened, you know, across borders kind of thing. And I'm sure quite a few stories came out of the chat that went on around that table. We didn't realize that we hadn't coined the phrase. We thought this was our name for it. And then we turned out, when years later we did Embassy, and we had advisors from diplomatic circles who told us about Thank God It's Friday drinks. And apparently that's the thing that diplomats have been doing for decades, having Thank God It's Friday drinks. So yeah, we didn't invent it, which is strange. We thought we had. Yeah.
Did you have favourite characters that you enjoyed writing for, dialogue for?
Yeah. Oh, well, Shelia. Just loved writing for Shelia. I enjoyed writing for Prisoner full stop. I enjoyed the fact that I was writing for very good actresses, and that I knew them and I knew how good they were. It's great when you're writing for people that you trust to understand what you're writing, because then you don't have to overwrite, you don't have to over-explain. You're used to the rhythms of their voices and their speech. And so, you know, you can recreate it in your head and put it down on the paper. But Shelia was, I think, my favourite character, because I thought she was so good as Lizzie.
Yeah.
I was saying to Ian the other day when we were watching it, with the performances, that occasionally it was a bit kind of over the top or forced, or, you know, a little bit of uneasiness early in the piece, to my mind, watching the performances of various people. But Lizzie, whom we all thought at the time, oh God, yeah, Sheila's gone over the top with Lizzie, because it's such a broad character. But watching it today, it's so true. She was so truthful in that character. She was broad and she was large and she was very funny, but she had a truth about that character that was undeniable, you know, that really had depth. I remember when she found out she was supposed to have a dicky heart, all of a sudden these gestures crept in to her performance. She'd suddenly be going, she'd just be, you know, she used to do that. It was a sort of, I don't know. I don't even know if she really thought that sort of thing out. I think she seemed to absorb these things and find the characteristics. But she always had a pain. She always used to have a bit of a pain there. It was beautifully done. There's nothing. Oh, what episode was it that she didn't die? There was one very sad episode for Lizzie. I'm trying to think which one it was, and I think it might have been one of the episodes that Ian wrote on my feet. When I was pregnant, that sounds weird. When I was pregnant with Lucas.
I wasn't sure what to ask about that. That
Christmas, Lucas was born in January, and the production break for Christmas the year before, we went over to see my parents in Perth, and we flew there. But by the time we were to come back, I was so pregnant, the airlines wouldn't take me. I don't know if that still happens, but it certainly did then. I was in my 8th month and they wouldn't allow me to fly. So we caught the train back across the Nullarbor. And Ian was writing, I think it was episode 100 actually, but I don't know if it was the one with Lizzie. But I was like a whale, and I used to lie down on the seat in the carriage with my feet up on Ian's lap, and he had his foolscap pad leaning on my feet, writing episode 100 longhand. That's how that got written. And I thought it involved Lizzie in a very, very sad scene. She did it so well. Darling Sheila.
Yeah. That's been one great thing about this podcast. We've learned so many stories about Sheila from on. It's
yeah, she was a real card.
Yeah.
She was when Lucas was finally born, and she said, "What's the kid's name?" And I said, "Lucas." She said, Lucas, that's a strange name. And Ellie said, "Oh, you silly fool, that's Lucas Bradley, isn't it?" Ellie was wonderful. Ellie used to scold Sheila all the time, but they adored each other. You know, Ellie used to keep her in line.
I have
Ellie was the one who told Ian that Sheila had been putting it about to all the new ones, that he told her that she had to have her teeth all extracted if she was going to get the part, which is typical Sheila.
I have a feeling that Sheila may have acted a little bit silly, but knew full well exactly what she was doing, just pulling everybody's strings a little bit.
Oh, you mean in real life? You mean as a not as Lizzie?
Well, part of this thing of saying Lucas, knowing full.
Yeah. Oh yeah. She was, she was quite a. Have you ever seen photographs of her when she was younger? Just beautiful woman. And then she had all these wrinkles. She used to send herself up all the time. She used to say that the cameraman used her face as a
test pattern.
Test pattern, that's right. Do you know what a test pattern is, Matt?
No, I don't.
You're probably too young. Well, in the old days of television, when it actually used to be turned off at 10:30, with stop transmission, when it finished, they used to put this test pattern on, so that when it started up again, all the I know you can explain better than I can, Ken.
The grayscale on the test pattern. But the other thing was, when we first got a television set in our house, it wouldn't start transmission until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we'd turn the TV on at 10 to 4, and we'd sit there watching the test pattern for 10 minutes.
Yes, I know. How amazing. Look at this test pattern. You get it on some printers, and sometimes with a printer, you have to print this page off every time you change the ink, because you have to get the definition right and everything. Well, that's what a test pattern was. So it was all full of wavy lines and little squares and circles. And Sheila said that her face was used as a test pattern because it had so many furrows and things. But going back to those days of television, I was working out the other day that a television set, when television came to Perth, which was only in 1959, And the ABC only opened a channel in 1960. So by that time, it probably didn't start earlier than much than 4 o'clock. But I do remember that they used to finish what they called children's programs, which was things like the Mouseketeers and stuff, at 6:30. And there would be this little graphic of a kangaroo with a little joey. And the kangaroo would put the joey in its pouch, and it would be "Good night, children." And they would pull down this sort of blind that said "Sleep well" or "Sweet dreams" or something. And then they'd actually stop transmission for about 10 minutes so that everybody could take the children away and put them to bed. And then the grown-up programs would come on, which were stuff like Wagon Train, you know, wasn't exactly porn. Yeah.
But they were adult programs.
That what?
They were adult programs back in those days.
They were adult programs, and even they finished at 10:30.
Yes, and we used to have a thing.
Sorry?
We used to have a thing called the epilogue, which was read.
Oh, yes. Yes, I remember the epilogue.
And then the test pattern. And then if you left the telly on, hoping against hope that maybe something else, maybe it would just start again. Occasionally, very, very occasionally, the TV stations would do a test broadcast at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever, just testing out something, or, you know, doing something special to see how it would work, and so forth and so on. And that occasionally, if you stayed up long enough, you might actually get lucky.
How old were you that you were allowed to stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning to see these things?
I was born in 1944, so
you're the same age as Ian. Sorry, you're the same age as Ian. He was born in 44.
I'm actually just a little bit older than Ian. But my mother used to take me to the films 2 or 3 times a week, and we were riveted to the radio, which before television came along was fantastic.
Yeah.
And then when television came along, I had my bed in the living room because we only had a little house. And so the television would be on it and I'd be propped up in my bed watching. So I could watch all sorts of programs. Back then.
I read in a book that they would send inspectors around to people that had TVs to make sure they paid the license.
Oh, yes.
TV in their house. I mean, that was just extraordinary. Is that true?
Yeah.
True.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, what I started to say when I brought up this subject was that because I was looking that up, it said a TV set in those days was around $300, and $1 was worth 9 today. $1 was the equivalent of 9 today, which means that's worth that. That's $1,000. People must have.
Yeah.
They were very expensive to begin with, and that would have been in 19.
You're telling me my sums are wrong.
Yes, because pound.
2,700. There you go.
Yeah.
That was pounds back in the 1950s.
But I think it was this particular article I was reading was saying, you know, in dollars, it had already done that conversion. But yeah, that's a lot of money. And they were not, you know, giant screen things that you can get these days. A little, tiny little sets with big bottoms.
Yeah.
Little sets called Bush Simpsons. There were all sorts of different brands around at that time. And they were in cabinets with doors that closed and made them.
I remember those, yeah. with the doors and everything. Yeah, because you had to close it as a piece of furniture in the corner when you're not using it, which was a lot of the time because there weren't any programs to watch. Your thing about being in bed and listening and being able to sort of sneak a look at the television, the number of people fans over the years who've told me, including some who were parents of the kids when they went to school that I got to know, and who told me that they used to, because they were banned from seeing Prisoner because it was too grown up, they used to do things like sneak in.
I did that.
And there you are. Yeah.
My mum used to catch me halfway through and she'd go, all right, come and.
All right.
I shouldn't have been watching it, but.
Yeah. That's funny, isn't it?
Yeah. You'd hear it come on and you just, you'd be out, you'd be behind the couch.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that funny?
Did you ever create any characters on Prisoner?
No, only Faye. And even then I didn't actually create her originally. What happened was Jane Clifton, who played Margot Gaffney, her agent had double booked her with something, some gig that Jane really wanted to do. And she, the Grundys was told, and I think had it been anybody else, they would have said, oh, her contract is to us and she has to do our show, not this other one, which was a concert of some sort, I think, or I don't know. Anyway, it was like happening on the Monday when they realized that she'd been double booked and she was actually supposed to be on Prisoner. So, but because it was Ian, who always believed in listening to actors, probably because he sort of grew up with them practically in Sydney, he knew more actors than he knew anybody else. But he always believed that if somebody wanted to go and do something, you should let them. If you possibly can, you should let them do what they want to do, because then they'll come back and they'll come back happier. So they're trying to organise what to do about this. And they decided that we could drop a character in that could just take over her lines, because she wasn't intricately involved in what was happening in those episodes that had already been written and were about to be produced, about to be shot. So they invented Faye, and Faye was named after Faye Russo, who was the script coordinator, and Betty Quinn, who was the storyliner and script editor and on Young Doctors, and a big favourite of all of us. All of us had known her and worked with her at some time. She was a mentor of young talent, really. She's a lovely, lovely lady. Mad gambler too, mad on racehorses. Anyway, so Faye Quinn was born, and I was a script editor, so I knew the scripts. I knew what the purpose was of this character in these particular episodes, and I've always been a quick study. So I became Faye Quinn and turned up. And it's interesting because I noticed one of the comments was, on her character is she suddenly randomly appears out of nowhere, nobody knows where she came from and what she was doing there. But that's precisely what happened. It's because they didn't want to do that thing of making me Margot, because in any case they wanted Margot back. So, and the other thing was nothing like Margot, it would have been ridiculous. So it was just another character. And that's what it was for the first lot. But Faye Quinn number 2, oh, my battery is running low, it says. Ian? I don't know, he's probably gone for a walk or something. I don't know how to sort this thing out.
Should be a plug in the side of it.
Yeah.
Yes, I've had the same problem.
There we are.
I've had the same
Technically
problem.
superb.
Brilliant.
Who needs a producer?
Yeah. Now the little message has vanished. How long have we been talking that we've run out of? Oh my God. A long time.
You okay to keep going, or?
That's all right. Yeah. Where was I? Oh yes, Faye Quinn number 2 was Ian was about to go up to Sydney to start PBL, and I had been writing for Holiday Island, and John McRae, who was producing Prisoner at the time, rang me up and said, "Do you want to resurrect Faye Quinn?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, okay." And he said, "Well, you'll have to write her major." To explain, a major is what you do in forward planning. All the script department get together and they work out, they go through all the main characters and they work out what their stories are going to be over the next, whatever the season is, right? The next 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever. And you write the progression of that story for each character. And then when you come to do the storylines and putting the episodes together, you choose which story is going to feature in that particular episode and what parts of the major you're going to progress the story with, plus whatever else is got to be done in the episode. The thing is to have, I mean, Ian always worked on, there was a story starting, there was a story that was right in the middle of the plot, and there was a story ending in every episode. And when I say ending, it didn't have to be the absolute end of that story, but it was it was the end part of the sequence of the major. So that's what you had to do for every character. And then you start off the season with a whole bunch of stories. So you've got content, and then other stuff creeps in and fills the content out. What had happened with the script department at that point in time was they'd obviously just run out of story. They had some story, but they were getting exhausted. And that happens with a lot of shows. I mean, with every show that goes on for long enough, you get to periods like that when you can't think of another thing. And so they were short on story. They had quite a lot, but they didn't have enough. And so the idea was get Annie to write her own story, write her own major, and then we'll have the extra content that we need, right? And the script department doesn't have to worry about that until they start putting together the episodes and decide which episode they'll drop in the different components of Faye's major. And so I created Faye's story for that second coming of Faye. And I created it, of course, with Ian's help, because I said, I can't think of a thing, what's going to happen if I... And he reminded me of a friend of ours who grew up thinking his cousin, he grew up with a girl he thought was his cousin, who actually turned out to be his niece, because she was the daughter of his sister, who'd had a child very early and had been given away to somebody else in the family. And he'd thought all this time that she was his cousin, and she wasn't. She was actually closer. And that apparently happens more often than you think. Anyway, that was the germ of the idea. And then, of course, developed it from there. And from what I had also learned about Faye's character as I played her the first time, because I was as an actress, I was kind of creating Faye's character on the run, as it were, because, you know, I was doing this stuff that was actually written for Margot, but I wasn't Margot, and I wouldn't have had the same motivations. So I found motivations for Faye, things that would drive her to do this or that or react in some way or other. And I had built a character by then in my head, which I could use for the plot of the second coming of Faye. That's how, yeah. So she was one character I did create, I can claim to, but I didn't create any of the others. Ian created quite a few of them. David Worthington created quite a few of them. You should have Dave on. He'd be very interesting to the fans. He'd know everything, all those questions about storylines he'd be able to answer. And of course, Denise Morgan did too, and Michael Brindley. Denise did a lot, created a lot of stuff. She was brilliant. We were so lucky to have her.
So do you think if Jane Clifton hadn't gone to that musical or wherever she was going, Faye would have happened still?
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not.
Interesting.
Whether I'd have done anything else in Prisoner, I don't know. But I know that Ian was quite reluctant to cast me in Prisoner as his first production, and I was his wife. I think he had a sort of reticence to the idea of, you know, casting your girlfriend in something. And besides, I was much too valuable to him behind the scenes. He needed a script editor a lot more than he needed an actress. And I didn't mind that. I mean, I understood that, and I also knew that he was casting very well. I respected all the women who were in Prisoner. The ones I knew I had a respect for a long time, but people that I came across because of Prisoner, like Val Lehman, you know, were very good. And I had a lot of respect for them. So it didn't worry me. But yeah, Faye was born by accident, which was almost the story of her life. Yeah. You know, she's a real accidental character.
Yeah.
I think.
Did you ever have a storyline that you wanted to write, but it never happened?
No, I don't think so. I can't remember any one. And because really my job with it was not story, my job was script editing, making sure that the stories the storyliners had thought up and had sent out to the writers were being told properly and told within the spirit of what the storyliners wanted and what Ian as producer wanted, sort of according to his vision of the show. So that was more my job. It wasn't my job to think up stories. And, you know, script editing took up plenty of time. I really wasn't messing about trying to think up new stories. That was their job.
You also wrote for All Saints and The Flying Doctors. What was it like writing for those two shows compared to writing for Prisoner? Was there a big difference?
It was good. It was a little strange because I was so used to working just with Ian. And I don't think anyone ever explained so lucidly what the purpose of things, the things that we were working on as Ian. And that's, you know, so you get an inspiration out of that. But All Saints was fun, of course, because it's a medical show. I enjoyed doing medical things. I was also in All Saints. I played a pediatrician.
Okay.
But rather like playing a Chinese girl, it was a bit hard, though. I was a regular, but I was a very irregular regular, because there are only so many scripts you can do about kids, especially since it's quite difficult to manage kids to get them on television set. So there weren't a lot of shows about kids, and I was a kids doctor. only did a few episodes, but that was fun. Flying Doctors has always been a wonderful, wonderful idea. I do remember one of the scripts that I wrote. I knew that Gary Sweet was going to play the leading role. I think it was called Daddy's Little Boy or something like that. And that was terrific writing that, because I knew Gary is somebody. There's a few people like this. Peter Tapano is another one. They suffer from what I call the Brad Pitt syndrome, which is they're so good looking that they get underrated as actors. You know, they're really good actors. It's only until they get sort of much older and maybe get a few lines or something that, on the whole, people really understand what good actors they are, because they're just so pretty to begin with. And Gary was one of those. But yeah, I wrote this for him, and I remember there's a scene at the end where he talks about how he's treated his child and how sad he is about it. It was a very emotional speech. But I really underplayed it, because when I wrote it, because I knew that Gary would get every ounce of pathos and meaning out of it. And I wouldn't have to worry about that. In fact, the less I gave him, the more he could work with, in a way. And then it got rewritten. Obviously, it was this real thing of, I thought, well, it's all my chickens coming home to roost, because, you know, I'd rewritten so many other people's things. And here it was coming back to bite me, because obviously whoever it was who was editing decided this speech wasn't emotional enough, and there should be a lot more stuff about how he's feeling and how to, and he's a really taciturn character. This guy was a big, strong Aussie country bloke who never spoke much. I mean, that was the big problem for him in the show. That was the issue. So for him to suddenly make a big, long speech, I thought was completely out of character. But anyway, they wrote it, and Gary did it, and he did a great job. And that's what you got to live with when you're a writer.
He's a great actor, though. He's awesome.
He's a terrific actor, yeah. Done some really good stuff. And he continues to do some very good stuff.
Yeah, he does. As we all know, and all the fans know, that your son Lucas played Chrissy Latham's daughter in Prisoner. How did that come about?
Yeah, well, we needed a baby in the show, and I just had one. So it's like a prop, really, wasn't it? It's difficult having children on set. If you're doing a children's show where most of the cast are children, you can set it up for that, and you've got your tutors, and you've got it all set up. But a random baby that's in a couple of scenes takes a lot of setting up to do, a lot of permissions from this, that, and the other, and a nurse has to be on set and all kinds of stuff, you know. Whereas the producer and the script editor had a baby who was very cute, and all the women knew him, so you know it was an obvious thing to do. The only trouble was they'd all been at the christening, and they'd met Lucas before, and they all loved him. And when he was brought on set, they were all oohing and oh, isn't he gorgeous? Oh, such a cute little fella, and all this sort of thing. And it took about 4 takes before people stopped blurting out that he was a boy, because he was a girl. He was Elizabeth. They all treated him like a boy. I was very nervous about having Lucas. I don't know why. Maybe he'd sort of suddenly start bawling in the middle of a tape or something, but he didn't. And in fact, he just kept his eyes closed for most of it. And then just when they did the close-up, he opened his eyes and looked at the camera. And that wasn't planned, and it was perfect.
Perfect.
Very happy. Arthur Kate also appeared in The Great Bookie Robbery.
Great.
I think you've seen The Great Bookie Robbery.
Oh,
Well, Kate appeared as the baby in that, and she was only 4 weeks old or something when she appeared in that. And I remember Marcus Cole, who was one of the directors, saying when they were shooting her scene and she's in the cot and the camera's looking down on her, and they had the reflectors and the lights, and Marcus Cole saying, "Oh, for Christ's sake, don't drop the reflector on the producer's baby." So I had to be very careful with her.
What a great cast in that movie. I mean, you as a brothel madam was great. Gary Sweet was great. Ray Ma was fantastic. I mean, it was just such a great movie. Yeah.
Wasn't Ray Ma lovely in that?
Yeah, he was brilliant.
I thought he was really good in that. Yeah, all of them. John Bache was terrific, the lead in that. Yeah. And I just had Kate, so I was a wonderfully blousy brothel madam. Lots of boobs.
Nat, do you want to just move along to season 4?
Sure can. So season 4, episode 48, which was written by yourself and produced by Ian. And the cameramen were Simon James, Robin Reed, and Ken Mulholland. So this episode I love because, I mean, it's prisoner at its best. You've got Susie Driscoll, who's working the streets at night as a young prostitute. You've got Chrissy Latham jumping from the prison roof onto a laundry van to escape outside the prison. You know, it's all happening. And do you remember much about writing that episode at all?
Not terribly. I can't say that I did, but I'm sure I had fun doing it. Chrissy was a wonderful character always to write for. Amanda's just like Chrissy, you know, just like her. She's a mad girl. But I mean, the thing is, I could see Amanda jumping onto the roof of the van today. Yeah. No, I don't. I'm afraid I don't remember that in detail. We wrote to storylines, and we wrote fast. So a lot of it sort of disappears in a blur after a while, particularly when you haven't watched, you know, like for 40 years. That's a long time. Yeah, and a lot of water under the bridge since then, and a lot of shows that we've done. So no, I don't particularly remember, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm very touched by the number of people who really enjoy Prisoner today.
Yeah,
love it so much.
And there's some really fan favorite episodes. There's a lot, and one of them is a big fan favorite. You know, a lot of comments on it, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You also played some roles on Homicide. One of them being the character of a lady by the name of Judy Bryant.
Yeah.
Where did that, you know, did Ian or the writers or anybody else decide that Judy Bryant was a good name for a prisoner, or how did it come about?
That's real serendipity. I mean, of course, I know Judy Bryant, and I knew Betty Bobbitt and loved her, loved the way she did it too. But I actually saw that in your notes, and I thought, I don't remember Judy Bryant. I did a lot of homicides, quite a few of them, as I said. In the beginning, because I looked so young, I played a lot of like 14-year-olds and things. But I looked it up. You find everything on the net these days. It's just extraordinary. I can't believe that I could find a reference to that episode. But I remember now because it said Cheryl/Judy Bryant. And it was the episode in which I played twins, which was huge fun. And Judy was the more staid of the two twins, and Cheryl was the wild girl. And Cheryl went off and did bad things, and Judy did very straight, good things. And we had great fun shooting that. But yeah, that's what it was. And it had nothing, it's way, way before Prisoner. And I don't think Ian would have even seen it. So yeah, it was just serendipitous.
Ken, season 4, episode 59.
Yes, this was written by yourself, Anne, and directed by John Gauchi. The cameraman was Simon James. Sid Vicious was his nickname. Peter Holland and Ken Mulholland. This episode you wrote and appeared in. To your knowledge, did anyone else ever write episodes and star in them or appear in them?
Not to my definite knowledge, certainly not at that stage. I was the first one to do that. I'm thinking that because Ian had played Mr. Douglas, Ian Smith played Mr. Douglas after a while, he was the man from the department. That was exactly the sort of part that someone from the script department would play, just like I was dropped in as Faye at the last minute. Mr. Douglas would have been the kind of person that you couldn't afford to pay a top actor for. In fact, they probably wouldn't have taken the part because it was so small. So, you know, someone who could act from the script department would do it. And I imagine that's what happened with Mr. Douglas, because it's actually past my time. But if he did that, then it's as likely that he would have written some script or other that in which he appeared as Mr. Douglas. And there was also, I noticed, although I didn't know it at the time, Barbara Ramsey apparently wrote for the show and was in it. Barbara was Robin Ramsey's wife, ex-wife at that stage, and she had been in Bellbird with us. So that's why I recognized the name. And if she'd been writing as well as doing some small part in Prisoner, it's likely that would have crossed over too. But on the whole, I don't think there were a lot of actors who both wrote and worked in the show. It's quite unusual.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, definitely. The same episode, there's an interesting scene that I was observing. So I've been rewatching them back again since we've been doing the podcast. Now, there's a scene with you and Paddy and Joan Ferguson, and you're both having a cigarette, but you don't actually smoke it. You're just holding it the whole time. Did you actually smoke back then, or you didn't?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, you
yeah,
did?
Everybody did. Ian didn't. He never smoked, but everybody else did. I think the reason would have been because if you've got to do several takes, which is always a possibility for one reason or another, and you're smoking a cigarette, you always have to have a new one if you've smoked the cigarette. And you can go through a pack of cigarettes, you know, like that. And I was never a really big smoker. I was more of a social smoker. If we were at a party or something, I could go through a pack of cigarettes. But on the whole, I didn't really smoke as regularly as some of the girls. And I gave up. Do you want to know how I gave up?
Yeah.
I had a terrible strep throat. I got terrible infection in my throat when Katie was only a few months old. We'd come back to Sydney, and I got this throat, and it was terrible. And I didn't want to smoke for about a couple of months. And then when it got better, I started getting that craving again. And I thought, now this is ridiculous. If I can go without it for 2 months, I can go without it forever. And it's not good for my health. So I decided that I wouldn't smoke again. And my plan was, if it got absolutely unbearable, I would have to go up to the shop and I would have to buy the packet of cigarettes, and I would have to smoke one immediately, and then I would have to throw the rest of them in the bin, and never have cigarettes in the house, which was easy with Ian not smoking anyway, or never about me, never on me. And I did that, and it actually worked, because it was such an effort and such an expense to do it that way that I would put it off and put it off and put it off until it got just too much and I had to go and get that ciggy. And the longer you stay without one, the more the nicotine clears from your system and the less you actually crave it. And in fact, the stronger the tobacco comes, so that by the end of that, I think the last cigarette I ever had made me feel really sick and dizzy because that addiction had gone, and but for ages, I think the people around Manly area, the people who go searching in bins for odd things, I think they thought all their Christmases had come at once because they kept finding these full packets of cigarettes unsmoked. Sorry.
In the same episode, there's a scene where you're in a small room with Paddy and she attacks you as she didn't like to be in enclosed spaces. Was that your idea for that character?
No, that wouldn't have been my idea. I'm sure that if you look at episodes that follow that, it has something to do with something else. That would have been a plot point in the major that was being fed in, that she's claustrophobic.
Yeah.
I'm sure it would have had something to do with a later story of hers, and it would have to be fed in at this stage so that when it happens, it's not a random thing like happened with poor old Faye when she was suddenly dropped in and nobody knew where she came from, So with Paddy, if you didn't know that she was claustrophobic beforehand, there would be a lot of explaining that would have to happen when the important scene comes along. So you drop it in these sorts of ways to get the audience primed to understand. Yeah.
Great storyline though, having someone claustrophobic in a cell, jail cell.
Yeah.
Also in this episode that we saw a new nurse called Neil Murray start at Wentworth, which was played by Adrian Wright, who sadly passed away in 2015. He turns out to be a serial killer that murders prostitutes. Did you have anything to do with his character at all? Or
no, I didn't. And I suspect that I didn't even know he was going to be a serial killer. I haven't seen the episode recently, so it's difficult for me to tell you, but I would suggest that his entrance wasn't very dramatic. No, because he just comes on as the new officer or something. Yeah,
nurse.
The new screw. That would have been the introduction. The storyliners would have known, but it wouldn't have been necessary to tell me. Wouldn't be necessary to put it in the storyline, because whatever I wrote was nothing to do with that. It was just introducing. This is the when I told you about the majors and the way you plotted episodes before, this would have been the beginning of that story, and we were busy with the middle part of some other story and the end part of another story in that particular episode. But this would have been the beginning of his story, which later goes on to reveal the rest of it.
Yeah.
So that's how we used to work. Let people get used to somebody before you start telling their story.
Okay.
Season 5, episode 1, written by Annelucas and directed by the late Juliana Fock. This episode is off the back of the season 4 cliffhanger with the big fire. How much input did you have in this episode as to the direction it was taking? And bearing in mind the 2 cast members die in the fire, Mouse, played by Jenta Sobot, and Barbara Fields, played by Susan Guerin. B nearly kills the freak and the women are transferred to Barnhurst, a real fan favourite, this particular episode. Did you have much input into that particular?
I remember that one well, and I think I can claim to have had quite a lot of input into that. I was aware of its importance because when I wrote it, I don't know what came before it when you say there was an end of season, the episode before it, because did I write that as well? I seem to remember that the episode with the fire, which was 327, I think, in the old numbers, I wrote knowing that it was going to be the end of the season. So either I wrote the other episode in the block, which did end up as being the season cliffhanger, or they changed it around. But I knew that the fire was to be the end of season cliffhanger, and an important end of season because it was a Christmas break. So, you know, you have a long break and you want the audience to come back next year. And so I was very careful when I was writing it, making sure that all the scenes were in the right place, because a lot of things were happening in a lot of areas of the prison, and there's a fire on. So you can't kind of dwell on one area too long without going and finding out what's happening in the other areas. Otherwise, your time differences would be all weird. So it took a lot of planning and a lot of thinking about, and also the scenes were so dramatic, yeah, that the dialogue really needed to be strong and pithy and not overwritten. You know, obviously, as I said before, I knew the people I was writing for. I knew what they could do and what they could do with fewer lines rather than more lines. So it was very good to write, and I thought I'd done a pretty good job. And then I went up to Sydney to join Ian. And I'd left the show completely by the time it was shot. And Juliana rang me after the shoot and said, I remember it to this day. She said, Annie, I've just finished the shoot. What a wonderful episode. Thank you so much for writing such a good script. It was easy to shoot because you'd worked it out so well. All I had to do was follow your directions. And I thought that was the sweetest, most generous thing. Writers don't normally get rung up by people and congratulated and thanked for good scripts. And that was really sweet coming from someone who was a good director and would have been an even better one. But as you know, Ken, that just after that, she told me, in fact, she was off to Bali for a long break and really looking forward to it. She'd been to Bali several times before and really loved it. And off she went. And then her boyfriend, Guy, rang us up about 3 weeks afterwards and said Juliana's had a terrible accident, fallen off a motor scooter and cracked her head open and she's dead. And it was just awful. And she was so talented, you know, she could have become a really good director. She was so enthusiastic. I mean, if you knew her, Ken, you would have shot that.
Quite possibly, yes.
Sorry.
But she shadowed Rod Hardy a lot of the time, and unfortunately, when this news came through, Rod was in this channel on a weekend doing some editing, and I bumped into him in the corridor, and I told Rod what had happened, and it just shattered him. He just walked away sobbing.
Yeah. I can only imagine. I know it's had the same effect on us. I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah, it just was so out of the blue. I do have a slightly amusing story to tell about Juliana and Rod. There was one day when she was down on the floor and Rod was up in the control room directing, and he did this scene, this single camera scene that was in, I'm not sure whether it was the laundry or the rec room or whatever, but because of the way the sets were all compressed a lot of times our booms had to be in the governor's office, for instance, and booming over into the laundry or wherever. And we'd have to travel around the booms and zoom out and zoom, track in and zoom out at the same time. Anyway, yes. Anyway, he got me to do this single camera scene. It went on for about 2.5, 3 minutes. And Juliana was down there watching it all and so forth and so on. And he really worked me out. I'd done the rehearsals and I was pretty stuffed by the time we got to, because it was tracking and elevating and de-elevating and doing everything. And I'm thinking, why me? Why do I?
What have I done?
Anyway, at the end, we taped it and I got it right. And I'm sort of leaning on the camera, hanging off the boom. And Juliana walked up to me and she said, "Isn't Rod wonderful?" Yeah, he's pretty wonderful.
Oh, you didn't. I'm sure you muttered something much worse than that. I would have.
Yes.
Yeah. Those cameras, I'm just thinking of you leaning on them. Do you remember, you must have been around when Graham Arthur, whom we all called Grace, who's director earlier on in the piece, and he died during the early part of Prisoner. But he was a gorgeous man, always fun, so funny. And he came round to our place one day and he was hysterical. And he could barely get the words out. Apparently, Channel 10, who was Channel O then, had ordered a new gas pedestal for the cameras. They look like Daleks, these things. And it had to come from the UK or somewhere, and it had finally arrived in this big box, and Graham said, "Oh, all so excited, we're standing around it, and unpack it," and so on. And we unpacked it, and nobody knew what it was, but it wasn't a gas pedestal. And they're all looking at it and trying to work out, was it a new design or something? And what's going on here? And then somebody read the side of the package, and it was a water pump.
Oh.
And, that was funny enough that they'd sent them a water pump instead of a gas pedestal for a TV camera. But what really got Graham, and he was literally rolling on the floor by now on our carpet, he said, "Can you imagine that poor peasant somewhere in Arabia or Saudi Arabia or Israel or somewhere who's just unpacking a gas pedestal and he hasn't the faintest idea what this new water pump is that he just ordered."
Graham, of course, was a cameraman. He was the head cameraman at Channel 7 when I was there as a lowly stagehand. And when he became a director and so forth, he rang me and said he wanted me to be on the camera crew for Prisoner, or for the show, whatever it was going to be called. And Graham and I, we had a long history in the past. And I can remember drunken times with Graham where he and I would break into song and do it absolutely together as a combination with the words and everything, and then fall over a couch or something or other, do it in unison. But he was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And when he was asked,
yes,
when he was asked, or he was told by a particular cameraman that what he planned out and plotted couldn't be done, Graham came down from the control room and proceeded to do it because of his old camera ability. And he said, "That's how you do it." And then he went back upstairs.
I like that story. That is very Grace. That's that's very him. And you can be very careful to tell people they can't do something that they've told you to do, you know, because they generally can do it.
Can do it, yeah.
Yeah, I believe that thoroughly.
Mm.
I do want to ask you about a certain scene on season 5, episode 8, which was written by you. So the women are back at Wentworth after the fire. They've been at Barnhurst and mixing around. We don't know what's happened to Joan Ferguson. She just disappeared from the fire. And then all of a sudden, all the inmates are in the rec room, all happy. Everyone's great. And then she walks in with a big neck brace on. There's a cake. She butts a cigarette out in the cake and B spits in her face. What a comeback for Joan Ferguson. Was that your whole, you wrote that?
Yeah, I do actually remember that. I honestly don't remember how much of it was my creation, how much of it was in the storyline. You know, when you're in the process of creating something like that, you kind of meld with the storyline. So a lot of the time afterwards, if you ask me, unless I got the piece of paper in front of me, I wouldn't be able to tell you if I thought it up or it was all there. Sometimes it was all there, particularly if someone like Denise Denise wasn't storylining by then, so it would have been someone like Dave. And Dave Worthington was very good at that sort of thing. And he could well have done the cigarette and the cake bit. That sounds very like him, actually. I might have elaborated on the rest of it. But yeah, as a good writer for serial television, you need a good storyliner, and you need to understand what's going on in the storyliner's head so that you can reproduce what he wants in a fashion where it can be shot and communicate that intent to the audience. Yeah.
So I'm sure at the time it would have been, all the fans would have been, is she coming back? Is she back? It would have been dramatic back then.
I know. Maggie was a wonderful villain, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was great.
Yeah.
Speaking of villains, we also see Jean Mary Carter arrive at Wentworth, who we later find out is really Nola Mackenzie. Did you know at the time that was the direction of that character? Did you have any inclination?
Yes, I did. I knew about Nola. Ian had wanted her in the show since the beginning. And so we were really pleased that, she finally made it in. She was, because I told you about Booze and Cheers, she was the mate from way back. And obviously we all knew she was a very good actress. But yeah, I certainly would have known that because I was very aware of who was playing her. So I'd have known why. Yeah.
Yeah, great part.
Your last episode was when B. Smith escaped in an officer's uniform and went to Sydney. Do you have any memories of working with Val?
Yeah, lots of memories. Nothing in particular, but as a general thing, I would say she was one of the actresses that I didn't know when we first started Prisoner. I'd worked with a lot of the others, but I didn't know Val, and I still call her B from time to time. It's terrible. But I was really knocked out by her. I thought she was fantastic. And I soon had a lot of respect for the work that she did. And she was never, she seemed to rub a few people up the wrong way that in cast and crew. But I never had any problem with her. Not personally, and certainly not professionally. She's a very professional person, even though I don't think she'd worked as a professional actress for very long before that. But she was a genius as B. I thought she did a terrific job. And the thing about Val is that she didn't care about whether she was liked by the audience. a lot of actors, and quite good actors, can absolutely ruin their performances because they want people to like them, you know. And I don't think Val gave a stuff whether people liked her or not. She was just going to play that part, and that part was who she thought Bea was, and had a pretty good idea too. I mean, she had the backup of the script department and of Ian, as to, because Ian used to sit down with people and explain what he had in mind with the major characters. And she obviously got it right from the beginning, and good actors do that. They just, they get what's needed, and then they produce it, and she did. Yeah, in spades. You're going to have her on, aren't you? That'll be fun.
Episode 11 she's been on, yeah. It hasn't gone up yet. Yeah, she was great. Great stories.
Yeah. She's good. She's a good person. What now? You're pointing at me, or you're pointing at the clock?
I'm pointing at Matt, because now we have fan questions.
Fan questions, which we've sort of covered a little bit over the last 2 hours. So, I mean, Anthony Winfield asked about he said he hopes you're well, and to walk us through the writing process, which we've already done. So we'll move over to Ken's question.
Ricky Brown also asked, I'd love you to ask Anne about her time on The Young Doctors. Her period on this was just before Prisoner started.
Yes, I finished up with Young Doctors in order to go down really to Melbourne. I flew up a few times to just finish off with it. But a lot of lovely people in Doctors. Tim Page, who played my husband in it, was lovely to work with. And Ian, who was Lynn Taylor's, who was Eric Taylor's wife? Was Lynn?
Lynn Taylor.
That's right. But she was Lynn something else as a...
Lynn James.
Lynn James, that's right. Lynn James was in it, and she was the wife of Eric Taylor that I was talking about earlier. So I knew a few people. Al Sandor had directed Last of the Red Hot Lovers, so I knew him. And Ian, of course, created Eve with me in mind, but he was only a storyliner at the time, so he didn't have the power to cast me. But I suspect that what with Faye Quinn, who was very supportive of Ian and me and all the young people, and Peter Connor, who was very sweet and soft, who was the other one in the script department. I think I pretty much had it wrapped up by the time they got to audition. But yeah, it was good doing Eve. It was a terrible sort of situation that we were in. We were in this big warehouse, which I think used to be a garage or something. You know, it was like a hangar. It was like an airplane hangar, and it had corrugated iron walls, and we shot it in there. In the women's dressing room, there's no such thing as separate dressing rooms. All the women had one dressing room, all the men had the other dressing room. And in the women's dressing room, the side of it, I think, was asbestos, which had cracked, and there was a vine growing through it into the dressing room. It reminds me so much of what I said Jeffrey Kendall told me, you know, this beautiful, glamorous costume with the beautiful lace, but the reality of it is not so glamorous. And it was like that with Young Doctors. We all became these stars of television, but the reality behind it was quite hard. I remember it used to get so hot in there sometimes in summer that the cameras would break down.
Oh, wow.
Because it wasn't air conditioned, and the cameras would break down, and we'd have to stop the shoot. We'd have to stop taping. And I remember Gwen Plum saying, well, it's all very well. When the actors are dying, nobody stops the show, but the cameras die, we stop the show. And that was true. The actors could have been falling over in the heat. They wouldn't have stopped. Yeah.
Mark Stubbs from the UK. Now, we've just touched on Nola McKenzie and Carol Skinner, but he just wanted to say this was a strong era of storytelling on Prisoner, in his opinion. He really loved the scenes with you and Carol.
Nola. Yeah, we liked doing them too. She liked beating me up. Although I think there was one comment which said, she looked as though she slapped your hand, not your face, which is probably true, because we had to fake a lot of that. Otherwise, I'd have been black and blue from top to toe. I got beaten up so much. In fact, one time, I think it was with, it was with Maggie. She had to slap me around. And I brought Lucas in to the studio, and he was only 2. And he was sitting in the green room with the rest of the girls. And of course, the monitor's on in the corner, you know, showing what's being shot on the studio floor. And he saw the scene with Maggie slapping me about and got terribly upset. So that when we finished, somebody said, you better get down to the green room because your son's really upset. I thought, what the hell's happened? I went down there, and it was because of this. And I was trying to explain to him that it was all acting and it wasn't true. We were just having fun. He didn't believe me in the least. He didn't think that looked like fun at all. And then Maggie came in, and she'd been told. So Maggie's hugging me and saying, see, yeah, I love your mummy. I love your mummy. See, we're good friends, aren't we, mummy? And all this sort of thing. Lucas sitting there thinking, I don't know. So I had to stop bringing him into the green room after that, because I wasn't sure about what he would see and how it would affect him. Yeah, but yeah, it's the same with Carol, because we had lots of fist fights.
Janice Robertson also asks, what was it like working with Maggie Kirkpatrick when Joan became involved in Faye's betting racket, demanding a share of the profits? And she also asks, how did you find juggling being a mum? Well, you pretty well told us, with a baby alongside working on Prisoner. It wasn't easy.
Yeah. Well, I've told you about Joan and Carol both beating me up, but we were very good friends. So, you know, that was something that was just, I mean, I guess more fun to do than anything, because you swear at each other afterwards. The thing about having little Lucas around, well, I told you after that I couldn't bring him into the green room. We had a nanny who looked after him during the day. And I mean, I was starting at 5 o'clock in the morning, so I'd leave him asleep, but he always stayed up for when I came home. He wouldn't go to sleep until I came home. And then he would almost immediately go to sleep. I'd put him to bed and I'd lie beside him and tell him stories and cuddle him, and then he would go off to sleep. But it was very difficult, because in that period, Ian had gone up to Sydney to set up PBL, and I had to work out the rest of Faye, most of Faye actually, the Faye Mark II, while he was up there. And Lucas was he couldn't understand what was going on. Why was Daddy somewhere called Sydney? And why would we down here? And why didn't we go and stay with Daddy? Or why didn't he come back here and stay with us? And that was difficult. But he was such a good kid that actually, I remember one day he almost had a tantrum, and he did this thing about, you know, where's Daddy and why we, and I started to cry, and I said, I miss him too. You know, I miss him too, but it's going to be all right, because he's looking for a house for us up there, and very soon we're going to go back up there. And I think Lucas, seeing my tears, realized even at 2 that there was something outside of him that was more than him, and that he trusted me enough to believe that it would be all right. And he was absolutely as good as gold after that. He never caused any trouble at all after that. it was a strange time for me because, and I think I'll tell the story because it might help somebody. Just prior to that, I'd been going through what we later realized was postnatal depression. That apparently, I mean, that is something that's quite well known in new mothers early to the birth, soon after. But apparently it can happen at almost any time. And for me, it came about a year and a half later because Lucas's birth had been really traumatic. He came out feet first. And, you know, you see in all the things about push, which is what I was prepared to do and what the contractions tell you, body, you must do. But in fact, because the birth canal was so narrow and my cervix hadn't dilated, if I had pushed, I'd have strangled him. So it was don't push all the way through giving birth, which is incredibly difficult to do. It's much more difficult than pushing because the whole body is screaming out to push, and I was just having to hold it back because the mere thought of having gone 9 months or 8 months as it was because he was premature with this baby inside of me and then killing it, you know, as it came out was just too much. I remember thinking, I'm an actress, I take direction, I'm very good at taking direction, so I can do this. I cannot push, I cannot. And I did, and it was all okay. But I think that trauma stayed with me for some time. And eventually it ended up with, in a kind of, all the way through, everything seemed okay. I went back to work. I felt terribly guilty when I went back to work because I wanted to go back to work. I enjoyed working. And at the same time, I felt immensely guilty not being at home with Lucas. So I was completely torn. And this is during the time when I was working for Crawford's on Holiday Island. And that turned eventually into what I know is depression. Now, I didn't understand it. I now know what it is and I can look back and see it, but I didn't understand it at the time. And I couldn't understand why I was feeling like this, why I would suddenly find tears on my face. You know, I wasn't bawling my eyes out or getting hysterical, but all the colours seemed to have gone out of the world. It was all black and white, and it was the middle of Melbourne winter as well. So, you know, I suppose that helped because everything's black and white in the middle of the Melbourne winter. But that seemed so weird. And eventually I went to a doctor. Now, because we always moved around so much, and both Ian and I was healthy as anything, we didn't actually have a regular doctor, a regular GP. So I had to find one out of the phone book. And we were living in St Kilda at the time. And I found this doctor and I made an appointment to see it. And anyone who's had mental health problems understands how difficult it is to explain what it is you're going through, because you don't know what it is you're going through. You don't understand it. And you don't, how do you find the words to explain what's happening to you? And there I was trying to explain this to this doctor, and he was just sitting there looking at me. And eventually, when I ran out of trying to explain, he said, "So what do you want me to do? Give you Valium or something?"
Wow.
And I said, "I don't know. Is that going to help?" And he said, "Look, I don't think you need me." And I said, "Well, I need somebody to help me and give me some advice." And he said, "Well, you better go to a psychiatrist or something." And I said, "But I don't know any. Can you give me a referral?" And he said, "No, you better go and find yourself another doctor." I was absolutely devastated. I walked out of there thinking, what on earth? I realised long after, we were in St Kilda. I think he thought I was trawling for prescriptions.
Oh, St Kilda,
I
yeah.
think he thought that I was going from doctor to doctor trying to get prescriptions for, you know, I guess that's what people did. But he had absolutely, you see, the idea of depression in those days wasn't recognized. I'm only talking about the 80s, but when you think about it, it's really only been in the last couple of decades that people have started talking about it and expressing their experiences and taking away the stigma and the shame, which still sticks around today. I'm sure there's heaps of people who have mental problems and don't recognize them, or if they do recognize them, think it's something wrong with them, as it was for me with the postnatal depression. It's a hormonal thing. And in fact, a very good friend of ours, whose wife was having a baby, she went through the same thing. And I recognized it. And I said, now you've got to go and see a doctor and tell them what it is. And if you get a good doctor, he'll tell you you've got postnatal depression, and he'll give you pills for it, which will right your hormones. And because it's all a big hormonal mix, which of course affects your emotions and makes you feel bad. So I hope that helps somebody. Just, it's not, the thing is, it's not you. It's not your fault. It's not a weakness in you. It is generally something that's physically gone wrong inside of you that needs to be put right. And you can get help, and you should. So I hope that helps.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm sure that will help someone that is watching this. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Okay, this is a big one. Rob Shaw in New South Wales said, excellent choice, obviously having you on. Faye was a great character and Anne played her well. Anne, have you been a writer for episodic TV, a couple of documentaries, a couple of TV movies? You have acted, produced, script edited. Do you prefer one of those above the others? And what would you do in 2021/2022 if somebody gave you the choice of doing literally any type of work you wanted anywhere in the world?
That's a really hard question. As to what I would prefer of the things that I've done, I would say acting, because acting is playing. I know that serious actors will look at me po-faced and say, oh, it's no hard work, and it is. I mean, there is all that, but it's also play acting, and it's fun, whatever you're playing. And generally, I adore comedy. I love comedy because I love making people laugh. It's just such a terrific thing. One of the reasons I love Ian is because he makes me laugh. He has such wit. But yeah, I would prefer acting of all of those, but you can't always choose. So, I've done the other things as well and enjoyed them too. As to what I do now, if I could do anything in the world, I'm not sure, because I really enjoy where I am at the moment. I love being a grandmother. I adore my grandchildren, and I think I'm going to be a grandmother again soon too. And when COVID finishes, and certainly before COVID, we traveled a lot and had lots of adventures, and I'd love to resume that again. And I want to get better at painting. I want to be able to do, as we were talking before, Ken, what I want to see on the page, to get on the page. And that takes a lot of work and practice. But if it had to be a job, and a paid job, then I think I'd like to do research for something. I enjoy reading. I enjoy researching things. I enjoy accumulating knowledge. It's something that I've loved all of my life. I'm very curious. I'm a curious sort of person. And one of the difficulties actually when researching for something like this is I'd find myself going off on a tangent, because I'd be looking something up and see something interesting and go off and then forget what I was doing in the first place. So yeah, I think I'd like to do research, maybe some art research, maybe be a curator in a art gallery, maybe the NGA. If anybody wants to offer me a job, looking at paintings and learning about techniques and yeah.
It sounds like you want to be a combination of writer, a book, and a librarian.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. And I'm told by some librarians that I know that librarian is not a glamorous job. There's a lot to do with just filing things. Don't do a lot of reading, just filing. That's what my friend told me.
It's interesting what you said about research, though, because I found myself doing exactly that when I knew a lot about you, but looking up certain things, and then I jumped onto Bellbird, and then I was looking at stuff about Bellbird when I should have been back a prisoner. And it's interesting that you can go off and you learn a lot more by research. It's fascinating.
Yeah. My husband, my TV royalty husband, just walked through and went,
yeah, I think it beat his time now. Ian was our longest interview, but I think you're about to go over.
I must be close. I didn't realise we could talk so long about this. I was
we're nearly done.
How we'd fill the hours, but we seem to have not had much of a problem.
We've got a couple more questions. Robert Ivory from the UK and Martin Duggan also, both kind of questions are similar about Billy. And do you think that Faye had a happy ending with her son, Billy? And Martin asks, just wondered what your thoughts were on the whole Billy storyline. You know, he was your son, but Faye's sister Glenys took him on. What do you think Faye Quinn would be doing in 2021?
Yeah, that's a big ask. Okay. Well, I told you how the Billy story came about. You know, he was 15, so we figured that Faye must be at least her late 20s and probably 30, right? Which makes her 70 today. So whatever she's been doing, she's probably done it by now. But yes, I do think there was a happy ending. And I think the thing about Faye was that she's always managed to keep her dignity as a person. You know, I have a feeling that she's one of the neglected people of the world, the sort that always seems to just be tolerated by others. But in amongst that, she's managed to sort of get a sense of self and of the things she wants to do and of the things she enjoys doing, and a kind of stubbornness that keeps her there as a person rather than disappearing into some, you know, huge hole of nothingness. And I think that would grow as she grew older. And I would like to think that she met somebody who liked the same things she did, but was also a bit more level-headed, but who really liked her, really enjoyed her company. And that would make Faye absolutely blossom, I think. And if she blossomed, she might get the courage to say to Billy, I'm your mum. Because by that time, he'd be old enough to cop that.
Yeah.
And he's always gotten on well with Faye anyway. So I think that would clear things up a lot. And probably Billy got married to somebody and had children, and now she's a gran like me, enjoying her grandchildren. So that's what I've got in mind for Faye.
You could always picture Faye running some pub in the country that's got the horse racing going and all the bets on the newspaper. And
yeah, well, she was, you know, you look at the things that she did. She was a pretty bright character. She had a brain. She just didn't know how to use it. She only knew how to use it by working out odds and form and, you know, doing that. Oh, that was that question from one of the fans saying, did I have to research being a bookie. I mean, I'd lived with Ian for 10 years by then. I used to hang about the, when I was back at uni, in Uni, New South Wales, it's right next door to Randwick Racecourse, and Ian had been working there race days. So race days, I'd come over when I finished my lectures and stuff, and walk over to Randwick, and I'd hang about the racecourse there while he was still working. And I got to know a lot of those people that go to the races regularly, never in the members stand, they're always in the ledger, and nobody knows anybody's name particularly. They call you Love, and you call them Love or Mate, but you share stuff, you know, you share things about what you backed and what you've lost and what you've won, and everybody shares in your triumphs and your disasters, but nobody tries to tell you what to do. And it seemed to me that Faye was one of those people who was always being told what to do. She was always being told what to do by her mum. She always being treated as somebody sort of who was useless and hopeless, and, you know, had to be treated like a little kid. When she comes out of jail and she's with her mum, she's 30 years old, and she's being treated like she's still 15.
And she was funny. I mean, you were sitting there with your mum. There was a scene, you're sitting there with your mum and you're reading the newspaper. She goes, "You're looking for a job?" She goes, "Yeah, there's a job here for a brain surgeon." I'm thinking, and it was great. It was
yeah. I think she was it, and she would have, you know, once she knew how to use her gifts, I think would be great. I think running a pub in the country is a lovely idea. Makes sense to me. And then Billy could come in and work there too.
Yeah, you come and run it. As a fan myself, and on behalf of all the fans worldwide, we do want to thank you for coming on. It's been an amazing interview, and to learn about your life and Prisoner, and for bringing us Faye Quinn and some of the episodes that you did write, and especially you and Ian. You know, you are TV royalty in my eyes, because I mean, you brought some amazing TV shows and movies to Australia that were just absolutely brilliant. So we do appreciate you coming on and chatting with us.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Ken.
Yes, and thank you so much. And thank you to our special guest stars, my dog Benny and Mr. Ian Bradley.
Yes.
Cameo.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Thanks, Anne.
What? He didn't like Ken. He didn't like the order of the credits. The dog first.
He barked first.
He barked first. Well, that's probably not true, but I was ignoring Ian for most of it.
That's not true. I wasn't even here.
Okay. Bye-bye, guys. Love
Bye-bye.
you.
Been a pleasure. We'll see you soon.